Hello YouTube. Today what I want to do is show you how I take the stool from this finish to this finish. If you've ever wanted to strip, stain, and recreate your very own driftwood barnwood look, well, stick around because I'm going to do it. One of the first things you have to do is to remove all the screws, so that way you can take the parts apart, get them down to their simplest elements. That way it makes it easier to sand it, strip it, whatever. It's much easier to strip a square or flat side than it is to get into all the little nooks and crannies. So we're gonna take all the screws out, take it apart. Now everything's broken down into the components. I've got it all apart, did that off camera for you so you wouldn't have to watch it, but I've got everything broke down now. You can see the seat and then the two spacers that were holding this apart. So now it makes it really easy to sand. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some 80 grit sandpaper and I'm going to go ahead and bust the finish on it. What I mean by that is I'm going to break the finish. I want to cut into the finish so that way when I put the stripper on there, it makes it much easier for that to get inside of the paint and between the wood and the paint, more importantly, and cause it to lift up. Oh hey, perfect timing. I just finished sanding. Well, what I'm going to do now is take a little lacquer thinner. This finish on here, I know from the previous one, is made out of lacquer, or it's a lacquer finish on me. So what I'm going to do is use lacquer thinner and wipe it all down, remove all the dust and all that before I put that stripper on there. I just want to make sure the stripper gets on here as well as possible. And if you take a look at it, you might see the edges kind of like a white color. That's because I actually went through the paint, touched the wood. I don't care. I'm using 80 grit. The reason being, again, is I really want to break into that hard outer finish of this paint. So when I put the stripper on there, it's able to seep through it, and that way it'll go down all the way to where the wood is, make the paint bubble up, and I just scrape it off. This is a citrus based, it's water soluble, so one of the things that I do is in between the projects, if I'm going to be working on it pretty quickly again, I mean, yeah, you can throw away these brushes. All you're doing is using it to apply the stuff anyways. So what I do is I cut the bottom of like a 2-liter bottle of soda, and I cut that off and I put my product into here, and then I go from here to my item I'm working on. The other secret to it is this stuff works while it's wet. So it has to be wet to work. Once it's dry, it's pretty much done working. So what I like to do is I like to wrap them in plastic. What it'll do is it'll help keep that moisture from evaporating out of the product, keeps it wet longer, keeps it activated longer. That way you don't need to use as much to get the same and or better effect on it. And that's my little secret. Hopefully it works for you. But I guess right now what I need to do is start putting this on there and shutting up so I can get it done. Oh, and the other thing is, if you don't want something to fall, put it on the floor. And you want to put it on until you see a good orange color. You don't need to overwork it, you're just putting it on and spreading it, making sure it's pretty even. Once it's got a good orange color, it's good. Once I get this done, I'm going to wrap it in plastic. And with wrapping it in plastic, it'll keep it wetter longer, like I was saying earlier. And that way I can go ahead and remove more with my scraper. So I'm just about done, but I wanted to show you the way basically I put it on. Now you can tell by how much I've got left. I'm going to need to put a little bit more in there, but I put it on, just brush it on. It's all about getting the product on there so that way it can work. It doesn't work in the container, it works when it's on your piece, so you got to get it on your piece. I need to put a little bit more on here. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up in some plastic I got. And then what we'll see next is when I take it out and I use my scraper and I'm starting to scrape it off. Now here's the important thing. You need some place to put all this goop that you're going to get off of it. It's terrible. And this stuff is like tar. It gets everywhere. So you got to be really careful with it. It's really good if you can get like a Home Depot, buy like a can or something like that. So that way you can put this stuff in the can, just scrape it off. I'm using some old rags that I have that really aren't good for anything else, so I'm using it to wipe it off. And now I'm going to start taking some of this paint off with my scraper. It's not plastic, it's metal. I know everybody says plastic, plastic. I don't think it's easier. I think for people that don't know or don't really work around wood that much, I think for them it's a little bit harder to gauge when they're starting to dig. You can also drag it with a metal knife. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't drag it and scrape it off that way. You don't have to always dig in. You can like pull it towards you. If if I didn't get this point across before, this stuff is a mess. So, paint coming off. Figure that. This stuff is nasty to mess with. I didn't use the sandpaper at the beginning, which was 80 grit. When it was painted, I didn't use that to remove the paint. I let the stripper do the removing of the paint. Then I used lacquer thinner and a rag and wiped all the excess paint off that I couldn't scrape off. Now what I'm doing is I've let these dry a little bit. The wood's gotten a little bit harder because it's not as moist as it was. And then I hit it with some 120 grit sandpaper just to make sure that there's no finish left on it at all, because I want all that stain to be the same. I don't want it to be darker in some spots and lighter in others. So, looks good. Let me go ahead and finish up the rest, and then when I get them done, I'll show you the stain. If you look, you can see there is a difference now between what I have and have not sanded. The reason for this is because there's a little bit of residue on here, and this is all fresh. Once I put the stain on there, it won't matter anyways because it's going to get darker again. But I got to make sure that I bust this finish that's on here, and I don't want it to keep the stain from going in there and giving it the color that I want. I don't want it to block it, so I've got to sand it. Could I sand this by machine? I've got an orbital sander, but with all the little pieces, the nooks and crannies and all that, to be honest with you, it's pretty much just as easy to do it by hand. Well, good afternoon. Guess what? Day number 2. So, first of all, if you see a wasp flying around or two, it's probably because there was a wasp nest like literally right above me, and I knocked it down, and now they're not so happy about it. Okay, well, I've got my pieces that I finished yesterday. They've been sitting all night long. They look great, but they're a little bit darker than what I want the end product to be. So when I put my white paint on here, and this is just any white paint, preferably a latex or acrylic, something that's water-based. Because I put water on here to, one, clean it off a little bit, again, and then also to put a little bit of moisture into here, so when I put the paint on here, it doesn't soak right into it and then lock in. And then I can't get it off, and then literally I've got a white stool again versus a gray one. So wet this down first, put the paint on here, basically just wipe it off till you're happy with it. If you're not happy with it, put a little bit more on. This is the initial wipe down, get a little bit of the extra dye stain that I put on here. In case there is any, and there's some extra that just didn't soak in, just didn't work for this project. So it's coming off, no big deal. Now I'm using a foam paintbrush. I moistened it a little bit with just plain water. Before you dip right into your container, especially since, like I said, it doesn't matter what kind of white paint you use. It just obviously should be like white or maybe a cream color, your choice. But since this is the paint that I use for my trim, and I'm not going to use that much of it, so that's why I don't mind using it, but since it's the paint I use for my trim, I don't want to be dipping in there and then going on here and getting this dark, or getting that dark from this dark. So let me go ahead and just wipe that down again. Make sure you got the edges, because you're going to leave a little bit of residue in the edges anyways. And see how you just paint it on? See how it is? Oh no, it's all white. What do I do? Let me go ahead and paint down this leg. Already got a good amount on there. Okay, so I put it on there. I'm going to paint down this one too. This is going to be the first one I wipe off because it's got white on there and it's not dry. So yeah, I wiped a little bit too much off, but not a problem, because look at this. Leave that on while I'm doing this side. Since this side was wet or already moistened, I'm going to leave that a little bit like that. I'm going to leave this one kind of heavy. And now it's time to move on this side. You look at this, you're going to go, oh man, this got a lot of white on it. But it's going to dry and it's going to get lighter, especially since it's dark wood. It's going to lighten it right up. So now we're in a different little zone over here. This is my side yard. I'm going to go ahead and paint the top now. When I say paint, I mean spray paint. I'm just putting a clear on here. You can see this is the actual look that I was going for. More of the barnwood, whitewashed. I wanted it to look old, kind of rustic looking. You can see the edges. And so that's what I did. Now I'm putting a flat or a matte clear on it. And so any flat or matte clear you want, just make sure you follow the instructions. And I'm going to be applying it. I'll show you a little bit of it. I've done the other pieces already. And so by doing this, I'll be able to finish it up and put it back together, and you can check it out. Oh hey, you just caught me. I was just finishing up with this spray painting. I put some clear on here. Well, my pieces have been cleared. I've got a finish on there now, so that way I don't have to worry about the finish becoming stained with anything else, or anything seeping into the wood, or anything in the wood seeping out, such as like the stain that I put on, or maybe even some of the paint. You can see the color. Now what's happened is that it was gray, I stripped it, it was dark still. I went ahead and took some lacquer thinner and I wiped all that off, so all the finish was gone, but it still leaves a little bit of a finish. I couldn't get it all off, so that's why I sanded it, so that way it would finish removing all that surface that was on there, so that way it could get down to the wood. I put some stain on it. I put it on kind of heavy, so that way it gave it a dark color, but then I put basically a whitewash on it. I put white paint on it that's water-based, and then wiped it off after wetting the wood. And if you look at it, I think you can see kind of the look that I'm going after, that distressed barnwood, driftwood look. That's what I was trying to do. So now it's time to put it together. So I'm going to put a couple screws in here, get the legs together, put the top on there, and then you can see what the finished thing looks like.